we run monthly seminars, community interest seminars. Tonight we have the most eminent speaker, Anne Buse, Professor Anne Buse from Melbourne University. Anne is Director of Women's Mental Health at Austin Health and North Park Private Hospital, I believe.
Oh, sort of not. Well, it was, but I've dropped the North Park now, so it's just Austin, yeah.
It's only the Austin Hospital, Austin Health. And of course, Professor at the University of Melbourne, no less. But Anne is a very multi-talented lady, as some of you may or may not realise. She is not only a Professor of Psychiatry, particularly women's issues and issues dealing with mothers and babes, and she is a renowned expert both nationally and internationally in those areas, but also an acclaimed novelist, I think we'd have to say.
I've got a few.
Pot boilers. Would that be an apt description?
I think so, yeah. So thrillers.
I'll just mention some of the titles that you may be interested in. You can certainly Google this, but I have to say they're fascinating names. Medusa's Curse.
Medea's Curse, yes.
2015. And then Dangerous to Know, that was in 2016. And your most recent one is This I Would Kill For, just being released, I believe,
earlier this year. Yeah.
What's upcoming, Anne? Just for our interest.
I've got two on the go at the moment. This audience is going to love it. One is set in a country town with a psychologist and a maternal child health nurse running postnatal depression groups, and there's one of the women in the group who has a touch of borderline. Her brother had been murdered 25 years ago, and there's stuff related to that that's going to impact her baby. So there's kind of this sort of threat through the novel about what's going to happen and how a psychologist has to sort it out. And then the other one, I'm a quarter of the way through, is set in a mother-baby unit where there's a murder, but it's not the baby. It's okay, it's not the baby. I keep picturing North Park in my head, but I have called it Southside. And I've put it down that way, not that way. Yeah, so all with perinatal themes in all of the books. Yeah,
obviously. So yeah. we could have you talk, on a literature night, perhaps, about your work and maybe your profession as through your novels.
Well, it's actually interesting. My husband wrote the Rosie Project, which has reached more people with autism and their families than any textbook on autism is ever going to reach. And it kind of really gave me the idea that, my textbook, a few nurses might have read it, but it's about it. Whereas this, fiction does reach a different audience and has that capacity to change attitudes. So that's not really it's a sides, if it does that, that'd be great, but I really just enjoy writing fiction.
I can't wait to get my first book. My wife Helga, you love these books, don't you? Okay. All right.
Fantastic. Thank you. So can I just get in? I know some of you. So I know there's some health professionals here. Are there any family sufferer, people that are here to kind of find out about it for themselves or their family? Okay, so we're kind of talking to a professional. It's just, I just don't want to pitch it at a level that you don't understand. So if anyone does, if I do, just, it's going to be pretty general, and I'm really, because it's such a small audience, kind of welcome some questions and sort of comments and your experience and things, because, I'm feeling a little bit grey-haired and kind of grumpy with the grey hair at times as well, particularly when I hear about what the government kind of, is doing, and then they do this and then they do that, and the left hand doesn't seem to know what the right hand is doing. I think this is probably never more apt than now. Galen was in earlier saying the average age in this hospital is now somewhere, what did you say, between 20 and 30? And I've been doing this for 30 years, and those babies are kind of now those 20-year-olds. And we've known increasingly in the research about the impact of mental illness on the children. but it's actually not mental illness. I mean, mental illness is what brings people in to present for help. It's a much bigger issue than mental illness, and I certainly wouldn't want anyone leaving here thinking I'm blaming mental illness for bad parenting, because it's absolutely not that. But I do think we have a lot of issues that we're dealing with really badly, and the people that suffer the most are the poor families, and the children are the ones that are going to be the worst off. And we're not really good at village stuff. We're really not very good at this kind of support that women with babies really need. And I think this is much more typical of how the women I see now and have been seeing feel. They feel isolated and they're stuck down some long dark tunnel with their baby, with no light at the end of it. And that's a pretty scary place to be. So these are the sort of the women that, you know, I'm passionate about in both fiction and in my work at the Austin. I still see people upstairs at North Park. So I do a lot of medico-legal second opinions for drugs and using medication in pregnancy. And the sooner we can get in and the sooner we can look at all of these issues, the more likely we'll be able to make better long-term things for these children. So when I started 30 years ago, it used to be called postnatal depression, but we've switched it to perinatal, and it's for a number of reasons. Back again 30 years ago, there was this sort of bit of a belief that pregnancy protected you, and it really doesn't. It just protects you from going into hospital because no one wants to admit you, if you're pregnant, into a psychiatric hospital. But, and there's this sort of belief that maybe you'll, as soon as the baby's delivered, you'll be fine. And really the evidence now is clear that that's not the case, that a lot of the postnatal depressions start antenatally, and if they don't start full-blown antenatally, you've certainly got plenty of warning signs, kind of, and alarm bells ringing. If only on a Murray Paul Austin, who's a professor in Sydney, the Royal Women's there does a standard checklist of risk factors. So this is not the Edinburgh looking for current depression, but looking for risk factors. And they try and really hone in on those women who have had a past history, a family history, no supports, and you know, maybe some domestic violence and a few other risk factors in the mix as well. And not all of them are going to go on to be depressed, but if you're going to target anyone, that's the time to sort of start targeting people, at least with information of what you can do and how you can get help. I think one of the biggest things we're struggling with, and I supervise an outreach team at the Austin, and one of my psychologists wants to do some research, which is fantastic. But she wants to do research looking at some intervention, which is, again, fantastic. But she said, well, you've got to come, what I'd like them to do is to come to the 8-week Circle of Security group. So this is just an education group, 2 hours every week for 8 weeks. And they've been doing this at Epping Maternal Child Health Centre. They've done it at Moreland, I think, free. So it's easily accessible. You can take your kid, and one of the nursing staff will look, or I think it's one of the nurses will look after the baby for you. And they get really good turnouts and really good outcomes. So she wanted to do that and then follow up with some individual sessions rather than the full 20-week therapy. And I said, that's great, but well, how are we going to fund it and a whole list of other things. But I said, you know, who's the clientele that you're getting along to these maternal child health, these courses, these 8-week courses? And they were by and large anxious, middle-class, educated, which is great, fine, but we in the outreach program are trying to, and what we're being paid to do, is the poor, often single, drug abused, or, you know, that group. And they're the group I want to access, and that's what we're being paid to do. And if we do research in the educated middle class, we're not going to be doing something for the group we're really meant to access. But the problem was, I said, and you've got, well, do they come? And they said, well, they sometimes that group turn up for one session and then that'll be it. And that's even with childcare, because we've offered free things to that group before, but have never been able to do childcare. This offers childcare, but we still couldn't get them along. So we have to be a lot smarter about accessing, and screening alone is not the answer. Some of you will know I was a big, the director of the Beyond Blue postnatal depression program, and I still think that was a really groundbreaking, important thing to do, to get screening on the agenda. But typical issues, screening happened in, I won't name the hospitals, but I just know it because I got involved in a medico-legal thing. Screening it was done in Hospital X. She got an Edinburgh, she was she got it both antenatally and postnatally. She screened high, and Edinburgh I think of 19, so a nice healthy, too high score, and she was referred to Clinic Z. Clinic Z weren't taking any referrals anymore, and that's all that ever happened. She just disappeared into the woodwork somewhere. That baby died, I might add. So we're looking at serious stuff here. But screening wasn't at fault. Our processes were at fault, and you can't rely on screening itself. So there's a long way to go, but we know it's really common. Certainly with depression and anxiety, not so common, 1 in 600. You can't say that, that's 1 in 600, have psychotic. But then there's all the people who already have a mental health issues, becoming pregnant as well. And we know that whatever the issues are, if you're unwell in pregnancy, there are real implications for the baby, and I'll talk about that a bit more. So the women with psychosis, a lot of these, not all, but a lot will go on to become bipolar. If not have bipolar episodes outside of pregnancies, then at least be at risk of another bipolar type episode in future pregnancies. And these are the ones that, if that first month, really at risk, and the babies are at risk too. It's not through anything malicious, but just because they are really, really unwell and not able to make judgments. And it mostly needs to be treated in hospital. Depression and anxiety, really common. I put this up now about developing countries because the popular wisdom about, 10 or 15 years ago, before Jane Fisher, a local professor of psychology, did some studies in Vietnam and some other places. We thought it was less over there. It was all our modern society causing postnatal depression. Well, look at those figures, it's not. The women having babies in Vietnam and India and China and places that are not first world countries are all got significant levels of depression. Different reasons. India and China come up with having a female baby as being a real issue, which I've actually never seen. The only time it's ever been a gender issue, the woman had a male and wanted a girl. So we just don't have that. But it's a society structure with the gender of the child. And always the educated, employed, having childcare and a supportive partner in wherever you are is going to be protective of your outcomes, and past family histories, low supports, high stresses and abuse histories are all going to be risk factors. So one of the things that's come up really big in the last 10 years is how if you're unwell in pregnancy, it impacts on that baby biologically. So I really should have when I'm doing it's just a whiteboard here, if I can just, and I do this a lot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. Okay, picture that there's 100 dots in there, okay? That's a 10 by 10. If you're having a baby with no mental illness and no medication, you've got a risk of about 3 to 4% of something going wrong. It may not be major, but everything from spina bifida to a splot of one of those red splodges called, come on, nursing staff. But the ones that go away. Any minor birth defects right through to the spina bifida are kind of. But if you have a mental illness and are on medication, it doubles. So that's pretty scary for women who need to take medication. So I have to keep reminding them, but hold on, you do have to stay well because it's not a zero risk of not taking medication. And remind that there is the other, all of that are actually doing okay. So it's still quite a small number. But the other thing which is really important is that this group, the group that have got that risk, are very different to the group that have got that risk. Because these aren't randomised controlled trials, the women that fit into that group are much more likely to be taking multiple drugs, much more likely to be overweight, have diabetes, and in one study, 10 times more likely to have fetal alcohol syndrome. So they are all things that you can control, well, many, not all, that you can control. So if these patients, aren't smoking and are prepared to stop their illicit drugs and their alcohol, then the risk is going to go way, way back down. But of course, a lot of very unwell women aren't going to be able to do that. But certainly, any individual that comes to see me, it's one of the things you've got to take into account with the medication. It's not all medication risk; it's all of the other behaviours that kind of all can go together. So a lot of my work is sort of looking at that and reminding women that if you go medication free, and I've had 2 women, admittedly only 2 in 30 years, but 2 women who came off their medications because they were desperately, and they were depressed, came off their medications when they were well to have a baby, both got really unwell, became so unwell they insisted on having a termination, then had the termination and got better, and then of course had to deal with the grief of terminating a baby they really wanted. So it's not a simple answer of just go off your meds. You've got to weigh this up. And I put that in particular at the moment because there's yet another paper out about autism and antidepressants. And I'm certainly not going to stand up and say, I will absolutely testify that antidepressants in exposure in pregnancy do not cause autism. I can't say that. The evidence isn't super strong though. What I would say is I'd be very careful about high doses of antidepressants in pregnancy. And the other thing that confounds some of the autism studies with antidepressant exposure is that there seems to be an overlap of genetics between depression and autism, or autism spectrum disorder. So you only have to have, if you need 5 genes to have a really, really bad depressive illness, and 3 of those are the same 3 that you need the 5 of for autism with a different 2, then you're obviously going to get this group in the middle. We're also having women having children a lot older, and we know that autism is associated with older maternal and paternal age. So it's not simple. I do get anxious about some of these studies, and obviously if you can get people off medication, great, but most of the women I see can't, and you've got to look at this. And you've got to look at the fact that if they are not well, what impact is that going to have on the child, on their partner, on their work, and in the postnatal phase, how long is it going to take them to get better, and what's it going to do to the attachment of the child. The depressed mothers, in the 0.3 is much more for third world countries, but certainly correlates to really bad outcomes for children in third world countries where they don't get their immunisations, they don't get fed properly, and they actually have quite significant mortality and certainly morbidity. So that's not quite so bad here. We've got a pretty good system. Maternal and child health nurses keep a pretty close eye on babies' weights and things. But the emotional interactions between women here in Australia certainly can be really significantly impaired if they're isolated and they've got a mental illness and there's no one else there for them and the baby. So depression and anxiety and schizophrenia and bipolar interferes really with that interaction between mum and baby. And we don't know enough about how much dads can counterbalance that, because all of the work's been done on the primary caregiver, which historically has been mum. But there's no reason to believe that men can't do it just as well. And I've certainly seen a bit of a shift with a lot more dads being hands-on and really wanting to be involved. But the reality is, usually one parent's going to be out at work, and that's more likely to be dads still, I think. So how much is them coming in at night time going to help? It's going to help, it'll help the resilience of the child, but whether it will be enough, I think, is the really big issue. So your primary carer is really, I mean, if you think of the primary carers with the baby, let's say 8 hours a day, and if the child's not seeing anyone else and dad comes in for, I guess, another 4 hours max before the kid goes to sleep, it's heavily weighted towards the primary caregiver of whatever gender or whoever that person is to having the biggest impact. And what we know about babies from the biological studies is, and Winnicott's and Bowlby's studies, is that the number one thing that babies need is comfort. So they bond with their, I'll say mother, but they bond with their primary carer through comfort. So when the mothers are doing this, and the eye contact, and doesn't have to be eye contact, some cultures don't do eye contact, our culture tends to promote it, but the soothing, the calm talking, that's when baby's oxytocin shoots up, and that's when mum's oxytocin shoots up. And when the standard dads come and do that, the oxytocin doesn't shift at all. Dads fall in love with their babies and vice versa when they go, wee, let's play. And that's when the oxytocins shoot up there. Now, there's no reason it can't be the other way around. I'm just talking about the studies which have been in traditional couples. And I did hear a number of years ago that Israel was doing some studies on gay couples, both gay women and gay men, but I've never seen the results, so I'm not sure quite what's happened to that because I think that'd be very interesting. But what there was kind of a couple of really key things over and beyond the physical demands of the baby that the primary carer needs to do. And one is convey to the child that you are delightful, you are the centre of the world, you are the most important person in the world. Now, not after they're 2, no, they have to learn there are other people in the world, but I'm talking about under 12 months. They have to convey, because that's the foundations of self-confidence. You have to convey that to your child for your child to soak it up. And the second, probably most important thing is, and you will protect me. So mums might be doing, there's a whole lot of complicated, how you look at how to make sense of this. Mums might be doing actually an okay job. Maybe they're not even depressed, they're doing fine with baby. The moment dad comes home and starts yelling and hitting them, they're not available for the child. Those voices are going to be, and that tension and anxiety the kid's going to pick up. So there's going to be, a whole period of time when that child's not going to get what they need. And depending on the vulnerability of the child, that can impact on long-term outcomes, even if they've had the good 8 hours beforehand. If they're not even getting the good 8 hours, then it's obviously going to be a lot worse. So the more inconsistent mum is, the worse it is. And the attachment studies are very clear that it's actually better to be insecurely attached than disorganised, because at least if you're insecurely attached, you know your mum's game plan. You know your mum can't cope with the cuddly bits. Mum wants to play. That's what mum can do. She can't deal. And babies can adjust to that. It's not great for them. They squash their stuff down, but at least they have a game plan. They know how to deal with mum. They can work with that. And likewise, if it's a meshed attachment, they know mum will never really be able to calm them properly and will certainly never encourage them to go out to play, but at least she's kind of around for them and there's something there to work on. Disorganised is basically the kids get left with, I don't have a clue what I'm to expect in the next 5 minutes, so I have no strategy. And I'll try a whole lot of random things, but I don't feel any of them are going to work. And they result in borderline personality disorder because they just haven't been able to develop a game plan to deal with people. So we're seeing these, right from in utero, and there's so much chance to be able to do so much and improve things. And I guess that's what I'd like to do. So this is just sort of some specific kind of how specific illnesses can impact on the parenting. And certainly if you're acutely psychotic, you might be at risk of incorporating baby into the hallucinations and delusions. And it's hard going to be able to sort of, keep your baby's needs in mind and reflect and be in the child's space if there's a voice telling you you're an idiot, and there's noises, and your sensorium isn't clear. So it's going to really significantly impair your judgment. A lot of the people I see don't have psychosis. They have, and these are particularly the protective services assessments I do, they're much more personality, drug and varying degrees of depression. And in some of those, the hoarding and the neglect issues are really quite profound. And anxiety seems to be ubiquitous, and no matter what the disorder is, it's hugely there, that the world really is a frightening place. And I don't tend to do many home visits. The one that will stand out in my mind forever is, it was in the back of a shop, and the entire room had been painted that colour. So ceilings, everything was totally black. Over in the corner was huge spider, not a real one, a plastic one or whatever, and that's where the child spent 24 hours, 7 days a week. And we intervened because it's a long time ago I did general medicine, but I was actually concerned about the retinal development and what this child's eyes were going to be doing, because it had so little real light. She actually did quite well, that one. But it took a lot of hard work from my team. They can affect in many ways. And I guess the biggest thing when I'm doing a parenting assessment is I talk about reflective functioning, which is the ability to see the world from the child's point of view. And if you can't do that, you can learn it. And Arietta Slade's done some great work in the States looking at I think it was about 16 to 24-year-old single mums, and she followed them all the way through pregnancy to 2 years, and basically a nurse visited every week for that entire time, and they were about rapport building and reflective functioning training, and they did really well. Took 2 years, but they did really well, and on many ways. These were girls who usually the control group had 5 children by the end of, had at least another baby by the end of the 2-year period, whereas this group didn't. They'd delayed having another child, they'd immunised the children were on the right, gaining the weight, because this was a very poor group, mostly Latin American, I think, black and Latin American. So, the reflective functioning is the key, because if you can get into the shoes of someone else, it's much easier to meet their needs. Okay, so I've sort of talked about this, and these are the sort of things that, what I say is, the mental illness is often only the sort of icing on the cake. It's really not the big issue. Many of the women that I see, particularly the ones where there are criminal cases, the intellectual development is significantly impaired. So we're talking about people with IQs, if you're 80, if you're lucky, but with that, no problem-solving abilities. So these are the denial of pregnancies that leave the babies or kill their babies. They panic. They don't have problem-solving capacities. I was involved in one where she dumped the child. She actually had the child in a hospital, but dumped the child. But she'd just frozen. She I can't take this baby home. I come from a religious family where no one will accept this baby. So she didn't think, oh, go and dump it at a hospital. She just dumped it. And she wasn't a malicious person. She was not psychopathic. I'm sure there are psychopathic women that do these things, but they're not the ones that I've seen. The ones I've seen tend to be, which is kind of why I write Medea's Curse, which is about infanticide, to really kind of shine a light on why bad things happen to good people, or at least normal people, and it does. And I've dealt with a number of cases of really quite tragic ends, where it was a mix of all of these things, domestic violence, low IQ, lack of support. Some of them tragically had supports, but they didn't go to them because they were, felt they'd be judged. And in many of these cases, if not prevented, some of them could have been prevented. I think there's no doubt about that. And I think when you're talking to health professionals, you're not going to prevent them all. The one that I talked about that fell through the cracks, she was, had the high Edinburgh score, was referred, never made it there. We can't actually work out what happened. All I can go back in time is they tell me on those dates we weren't taking any referrals, but have no record of this woman. I suspect she never went. I mean, I never followed it up, but fell through that crack. She ended up in a refuge, and the refuge wouldn't allow any mental health workers in, which I find a little curious, but anyway. Mental health nurses in. They had a social worker. And the social worker, I am absolutely sure, thought she was doing the right thing and really was doing the right thing, suggested the child went into childcare to give her a break. But this was a really, really complex case where they were so enmeshed, this mother and child, that the suggestion of her being taken away from her was tantamount to saying, I will have nothing left in my life and I'm no good. So it was a really complex thing that quick, easy solutions were never going to. This was a woman who'd had multiple rejections and really, really loved this baby, which made it even the more tragic for what happened from everyone involved. So some of them are really complex, and increasingly, I think any simple answer to some of these really difficult cases as being a bit naive. So is postnatal illness different to mental illness at any other time? Well, it's certainly different because there's someone there in the tunnel with the woman, so there's a baby to be taken into account. So if it's in utero or breastfeeding, there's the drug-related issues that you're going to be worrying about. They also tend to, if they've got postnatal depression, they tend to be more anxious. They often don't look as depressed as people at other periods of time. It's the anxiety that's kind of the really focus, and they're really good at covering up. And when, in many ways, and I think it probably still does work at North Park, that you can come in under a paediatrician or under a psychiatrist. And what we found when it was a bigger unit, when I was involved with it, and we had at least 12 beds back then, was you'd have 4 under paediatricians, but they could only stay a week. But they'd have their week and they'd look at the 8 women and the psychiatrist that the 8 women were seeing and thinking, well, they're actually just like me. The psychiatrists don't seem to have 2 heads. Maybe I need to stay a week or 2 and just deal with. So it was kind of a wonderful transition through the stigma. You could get in under a paediatrician. You can tell your mother-in-law it's all the baby's sleeping problem, but get help for yourself. I think it's all very well to say you just need to face things head on, but a lot of there's big stuff to face and get through. So if there are ways of stepping you through into getting help and addressing that stigma, I think that's important. When we did a Beyond Blue ad at one stage, there was this ad, and I thought it was a really good ad. I really didn't have anything to do with it. Beyond Blue did it. We just said, yes, we need an ad to make perinatal illness people more aware of it. And so we're going back to 2005 now, and the woman is crying and she slumps in front of a dishwasher, sort of about here, and the baby's in a rocker about there, but the camera's using a wide angle and it looks like they're a long way apart. And we used this ad in a group with women, and I said, oh, do you identify with this mother? Oh, no. I'm thinking, why not? She's, miserable like you guys are, and, she's got a baby. Oh, no. She doesn't love that baby, but she'd left the baby to cry in this ad, and they thought the distance was too far, so that meant she didn't love the baby, and therefore that meant she was a bad mother, and they didn't want to be seen as a bad mother. That was a really, even worse than the depression stigma was the stigma of being seen as a bad mother. So this can just stop people getting into help. So Who is at risk? I've talked about yet. Certainly past, I mean, it can happen to anyone, but past and family history of affective disorders are the biggest risks. And then mums and partners are the next kind of biggest important people in your life. If your mother's not supportive, it's a double whammy. A, she's not physically there to be supportive, but B, it means there's a reason she's not supportive. So what happened in the childhood that's caused this rift, and is that part of the problem, or is she dead, and is that part of the problem that's led you to be more vulnerable? Just sheer number of stresses. Having a baby, you go down to one wage, it puts a lot of changes the dynamics of the marital relationship. You're sometimes moving house, renovating. All of those things can be really stressful. And if you do have an abuse history, you're going to be worried about protective services coming in and removing your baby, and your memories and all of that trauma is going to get stirred up whether you want it to be or not. Some people can glide through that, generally the avoidant attached people, but even then it usually explodes out at some stage, and they're the really difficult ones to access. I've done the stresses twice. Stresses are obviously really important. So what do? We have to identify them first and engage them second. And the engagement and keeping them engaged is really pretty critical. We need to work out what the problem is, and there is a whole lot of women with a milder form of depression that aren't going to need medication, that aren't going to need a whole host of interventions, and you've got to separate that out. And if there are comorbidities like they're drinking, drug using, if there's serious domestic violence, all of that kind of really has to be dealt with as well. You can't just magically treat the depression and it'll all go away. Got a whole, loads of meds that we can use. Arguably, we sometimes use too many, too often and too long. But there's no doubt they're very effective in some populations. So you just, if the illness is severe enough, going on long enough and affecting not just quality of life, but their ability to work, to care for the child, then you really got to, seriously have a discussion with them about what medication options do you want to give a try. If it doesn't work, can we try something else? A lot of the women I see are just really struggle, even if they can access a psychologist, struggle to be motivated enough, struggle to do the homework, and sometimes you need the medication first and then that. Sometimes you can do the two of them in together. And of course, considering if they're breastfeeding and in utero, what that might do to the baby, and using these sort of maps when you're looking at that. There's a woman I was seeing this afternoon who's sort of middle class, but really, really anxious, and a lot of it was line 2 really, and it was about really getting her to separate herself from what she thought society expects of her and what is a healthy life for you. And that might mean going out without some things. It might mean not being on Facebook all the time. There's a whole lot of things that we've introduced into our society that aren't helping us connect and support us. And you've got to look at the individual cases to what's going to be, what's best for them and how you're going to access it for them. There's no doubt that for the milder end, just supportive psychotherapy, just a weekly visit with someone, a health professional, to chat is really helpful, and they do really well. A lot of people just get better in 12 weeks with that and not much else. IPT, interpersonal therapy, CBT and mindfulness these days all have a role in this group. And one of my PhD students has just adapted IPT to look at because usually it's focused on the relationship more with parents and the partner, but it can be also focused to look on improving the relationship with the child as well. And socially, you know, getting them out there in groups, linking them with other mums. I mean, again and again, isolation, isolation and isolation I see with this group. We've got women isolated, can't drive and living in Kinglake, and their partner lost their licence and they're stuck there. And it's like, oh, okay, Kinglake's a lovely place, but only if you've got a car. So a wonderful judge, bless him, delayed the guy losing his licence for 3 months while they sorted out moving into town. So you can get lots of, you know, even the court systems can work in your favour and do a sensible thing. You also got to remember Dad might be depressed. This can be a really tough time, and some of the stresses that the woman might be under, he also might be under. And I was sort of always ask about relationship with mum, even if mum's not on the scene, because it gives you a bit of an idea of the role model that she had. And I pretty much always ask the question, which comes off the adult attachment interview, which is think back to as young, and I'm presuming the mum is the primary caregiver, so if it's not the mum, whoever the primary caregiver was, think back to as young as you can remember and think about your relationship with that primary caregiver and 5 words or phrases that describe that. It tells you a lot from that, and then get them to explain a bit more if it's not obvious, and that tells you even more. So because that's what they're coming into this new role being. It's like putting someone into a McLaren's Formula One car if the only experience they've had of driving is something that broke down every 3 feet, and the water, no, I know it doesn't, you don't have water spluttering out of engines anymore, but that's the sort of the difference. You're expecting someone to do something with so little grounding in it, if that's the sort of background they're coming from. And don't forget the relationship with the mother and this mother and her baby, and the circle of security is, you know, a lot of people have done, who's done some sort of circle of security training? Couple, yeah, 3. Look, there are others, but it's just a kind of a really easily accessible, easily explainable way to help women understand their attachment, the child's attachment needs. And if you do it with videos and things, helping them get their own issues out of that. To kind of make it a bit more real, and so you don't have to keep listening to me. Oh, actually, hold on. I can't have this videoed. I can't have the video videoed. You can keep it at me, but because I can't, yeah, sorry. You can still have the sound, just can't have the video.
Okay, so if I just turn it.
Yeah, you just on, if you can have it on me and just not on the video, that's fine. Just to sort of make it sort of real, to sort of show the sort of issues that when someone, you might recognise this one, it's not, turning down the lights. This woman was depressed for a number of months, like I think she was in hospital in North Park for 6 months. And you can't see it all that well, but her face is just totally flat. She's also not talking. The baby was doing beautifully because Dad was doing a lot of wee, and so were the nursing staff who did a lot of really that's better. But there's sort of no conversation, very little eye contact. But notice that there was one positive interaction there, and when I showed her the video, I asked her how did she feel about it, and she said, I felt rejected. And I thought, wow. And so she didn't see that interaction. She didn't see that time he turned to her. she remembered him not looking at her. And she still had this picture of a sort of a young baby that always looks to mum or spends a lot of time. Whereas a 9-month-older is actually meant to do a lot of looking at toys. He was doing pretty well. He did extremely well. And we saw her a little bit later, and there's this it's a really bad video, but it's worth it for if you can't hear it, I'll tell you what he says. So this is the same little boy grown up. So that's him there. There's a lot of delight going on now. She's not depressed at the moment. And we leave him alone. And he gets, so he's left in the room alone. He's 2.5. He's a really cute kid. He's a bit frozen, but he's not without some skills. And this is the really important bit. Mum comes back. That's a stranger sitting in the corner. Don't worry about her.
They hang up.
So there's a real phone sitting in the corner. So he's gone to this real phone, okay? And this is just after her return.
Look on there. No one there. Mummy. You were too slow to say hello.
Mummy, I ringed you. Mummy, I ringed you. No.
Anyone make out what she said? He says,
I ringed you, Mum.
I ringed you, Mummy. That's what he says. He says, I ringed you, Mummy.
The ring through.
No, ringed you.
Rings
She says, you ring through. No, I ringed you.
soon.
Yeah.
Well, they
I
can't
ring
ring you,
too.
you're holding it.
She mishears him
can't ring
every
you, hold it.
single time. And the interesting part of this is she was desperate for him to be grown up because she was about to have another baby. Oh, she was, I think, 6 months pregnant or something at this stage. So she was pushing him to the top half of the circle to be my little man. She called him my little man, and she was devastated. When she saw this, she went, oh my God, he's still a baby. What am I doing? It was a really positive thing from her point of view. She's a lovely attachment. They're a really, really lovely couple. And there's just this really cute photo, if I can just right at the end. Oh, I don't know if I can speed it on.
Oops. Drop the babies.
I just wanted to. Oh, I've got to go through it all. You just get this really cute photo at the end.
I wouldn't have done power.
But he did really well. Oh, don't worry, we'll move on, I think. So he did really well. This is another one, again, North Park Mum, just showing about anxiety and the impact of anxiety. This is a little baby. I think it'll be a little baby when I can find it. Okay. And if you look at baby's expression, he's pretty tense and anxious, and he's trying really hard to stay with Mum, but she's not really responding to his cues. She's doing her thing and he's trying to keep up with her, but he's wriggling, he's unhappy, he's not really keen on this. We brought in a stranger. Lasted 3 seconds. And it took her about 20 minutes to settle the baby after that. Baby was so distressed.
If you could see them without do, but
When we had her in a group, and the nursing staff who were looking after her baby in the next room said by about week 4 or 5, if you don't do something with this baby or this mother, we're resigning, kind of thing, because the baby was so distressed all the time, separated from Mum. And by week 9, things had improved. But it took a while. He was just like this constantly. Really, this is a very, very anxious mum. Anxiety sort of raided everywhere from her. But after the circular security group, which is what we call baby love, he's much more settled, and she tolerates him looking away, doesn't expect him looking at her all the time. And he actually coped alone. He's only a very little baby. He was miserable, but he coped. That was the stranger just leaving. He distracts himself a bit. Actually, no, this is the stranger stranger came in, stranger's leaving. And he's just sighted mum. So in the sort of course of 3 months, you're able to make a huge difference. And this is just kind of one of the many things you can get online from the Circle of Security that really just helps them explain that your child's not rejecting you when they want to go out to play, and the child's not in the sort of pain that you might be experiencing when they come in needing to be comforted, because what's being stirred up in you is what didn't get looked after back 30 years ago. That's not what the child's experiencing. The child is just needing some comfort here and now, and it's about understanding that difference. And I think I've got one, just again, all North Park mums. This is just a lovely, shows you the Circle of Security so beautifully, because here's the child on the top half playing. She's not depressed anymore. And she does talk to him. She engages with him, not great eye contact, but that's because of how they're sitting. But he's on the top half of the circle. He's about a 6 month older, I think. And then things don't go as well as expected, as happens in the world. In a minute. About to go. So he's exploring, she's tolerating him explore. But then...
Where did it go?
Ouch. Okay, straight down to the bottom half of the circle. What does he need?
Where did it go, Bubba?
And look what she does.
Okay.
Faces him out, puts him down, clearly needs a cuddle, needs comforting. She needs him to be up on the top half of the circle. She's looking for things to play. He's more or less settling himself down, but he's still not, you can hear his whimpers not quite right.
Where's the baby?
He's just still not quite right.
Okay.
She touches him,
All better?
definite bonus
All better?
until that.
What's up? What's up? What's up?
But then watch what he does.
You want to do something different?
And he soothes himself with touch. So he's a great co-therapist here. Babies are really, really not going to give up on their mums. And some lovely eye contact, some great stuff, but he had to initiate it. And it's really about helping these mums initiate it themselves and be able to read those cues and manage the child around the circle so that they feel confident to do that.
What you doing?
Okay, you can turn it back round over to that and turn the lights back on again. So I know it said 8:30, and if you want to ask me the questions till 8:30, I'm happy to stay here till 8:30, but my talks tend to be about an hour talk, so this is sort of, I'll finish here, and as I said, very happy to take questions, comments. You know, it's not going away anytime soon. It was there 30 years ago and it's still here now, and I think it's going to be even more in the next generation. I think it's going to get worse, is my prediction, because of some of the 20 and 30-year-olds haven't had enough hands on their circle and enough boundaries and enough limits and enough social cohesion around them to be able to bring up kids without disintegrating. So I hope I'm wrong, but there's just this, you know, there's a big chunk that are really missed out on a whole lot of stuff. And you go on social media, or you look on the news, or even on reality TV. Look, there's just no good news anywhere. I wanted to go around cheering today when I got the paper and I read those Thai boys were found alive. Yes. I mean, how often do you get to hear positive news like that? And it's, and I think that's bad enough. But I think the social media issue is a much bigger one. I'm just probably an old fuddy-duddy, but I think there's positives about social media, and it's about keeping it contained and having real contact, meaningful contact as well for these young people when they start having families of their own. And we need to keep finding ways of how to access them, and that, you know, helping mothers helps babies. So, very happy to, questions, comments. Yeah.
I was curious when you were talking about how, that doubling of the risk of some kind of birth problem if they've been on medication. You can statistically control for those other factors that you talked about.
Yep.
So why hasn't that been done?
Well, it has, and it comes down. It brings it right down, but it doesn't bring it completely down. There's still